Hi, everybody. My name is Janine Garcia, and I'm one of the education coordinators at the San Antonio River Authority. And today we're talking about the story of litter. So we're really going to explore where litter begins, its really long journey, and then how we can work together as a community to end this story. So without further ado, let's get into it, y'all. If you live in San Antonio and you visited the river, you're probably familiar with the Downtown Riverwalk, which is a really cool piece of the San Antonio River. Lots of stuff to do out there, but it's only like this teeny tiny section of the entire river. In San Antonio, we also have the Mission Reach. So this is south of downtown, lots of native plants and animals, beautiful spaces to go walk your dog, ride your bike, all kinds of stuff. We also have the Museum Reach. So this is in the Pearl area, really good mixture of native plants and animals in a very urban setting. And then we have a lot of artwork all around the river. This is my favorite piece. So this is called FISH or Fish. And this is where these huge native sunfish, these replicas obviously, hang above the river where it goes underneath Highway 35. And they light up at night. They're really, really pretty. So go check them out. They're in the Museum Reach in the Pearl area. And then we also have places where you can go fishing or kayaking, canoeing, all kinds of fun stuff. So get out and explore your river. But speaking of the San Antonio River, we are going to talk about the story of litter and how litter impacts the San Antonio River. So I want y'all to think back in your mind all the way back to like elementary school, first grade, when you learned the parts of a story. To refresh your memory, right, we're going to talk about the characters. So who is involved in this story? We'll talk about the setting or where the story takes place. We'll also talk about the plot or how things move from the beginning to the middle to the end of this story. And then we'll talk about the turning point or the climax. This is where the problem is super, super big as it gets. Kind of the sad part of the story, if you will. And then we'll talk about the resolution. So this is the good part. This is how we can get together to solve this problem. So we'll end it on a happy note, I promise. All right, so first thing we're going to talk about, y'all, the characters. I consider litter to be a character. It's kind of the star of the show, right? So what I want y'all to do is I want you guys to come up with a definition of litter. And so I'll pause here for a second if your teacher wants to pause the video so that y'all can create your definition of the word litter. All right. Hopefully you got some good responses. I'm going to show you the official definition of the word litter, I guess. It's probably pretty close to what you came up with. It's any type of trash that's thrown away in a place where trash doesn't belong. So this could be on a street, in the grass, parking lot, something like that. Or trash that has just escaped from its container. So maybe it's blown out of a dumpster or a trash can. Maybe it's flown out the back of a truck, something like that. And some more characters who are involved in this story. Who do y'all think is responsible for littering most of the time? It's probably a pretty easy answer, right? It's us. It's people. People who throw trash on the ground either on purpose or sometimes by accident, right? Accidents happen. That's okay. But we just got to be aware. So another character who's responsible for littering, y'all, curious critters. If you leave a trash can open, of course raccoons and possums and skunks are going to want to go exploring inside. And if they knock some stuff out of the trash can onto the ground, they don't know that they're littering, right? So it's really important to have those lids closed on trash cans. But another character responsible for littering, this can just be vehicles on the open road. So things might fly out of a window or the bed of a truck, like we mentioned earlier. And then, y'all, last but not least, this kind of gets overlooked, but we also really have to look at the restaurants, the offices, the businesses who are creating these items way before they ever get littered. So if you look at this picture, if you recognize any of these brands, we also need to bring them into the conversation so that we can really have a comprehensive solution to littering. All right, so now that we've looked at the characters, everybody that's responsible for littering, we're going to move on to the setting or where our story takes place. So the setting today that we're going to talk about is the San Antonio River watershed. This is a really big area of land in Texas. It's that blue chunk of land. All of that land is connected to the San Antonio River. So if you look at this picture, you might notice all of these teeny tiny little creeks and tributaries. All of those little waterways are leading into the San Antonio River. And the San Antonio River starts up here in San Antonio, and it flows for 240 miles until this point right here where it merges with the Guadalupe River, and then together they empty into the San Antonio Bay. And so I really want y'all to remember how all of these little creeks and rivers, all these different tributaries flow into the San Antonio River. It'll be important to keep that in mind for when we talk about how litter moves from land to water. All right, getting a little bit more specific in our setting, I want to know, where have you found litter before? Where do you think we can find litter? I'm going to pause for a second if your teacher wants to pause the video and ask you. All right, so hopefully y'all got some good answers. We kind of group these locations by three big categories. So one place you can find litter, on the ground, right? That's a pretty big location. Bonus points if you can look at this picture and tell me what was the holiday that happened the day before we took this picture. We also might find litter just in the water already. So this is Davis Lake. It's part of the San Antonio River watershed in South San Antonio. And then we might find litter that's kind of on its way through the environment, but it got stuck in something. So this might be a plastic bag or a big balloon that's stuck in the branches of a tree, something caught in a chain link fence, in the bushes, something like that. So that's another part of our setting. And then another location, just to kind of keep in mind, we do see illegal dumping, and this is when people will take really big items that they don't want to throw in the landfill, take them to an area where items accumulate, unfortunately. This is obviously illegal, as you can tell from the name. Really, really bad for the environment to do this, but we see this a lot. We see litter on the ground after Fiesta every year. Y'all, let's just remind our friends and family while we're going to these really fun events that there are trash cans that we need to be using, right? We also might find litter along the banks of the San Antonio River, so it hasn't quite reached the water yet. And then, of course, we can find litter that is entering into the San Antonio River, and we often do. All right, so the next part of our story, now that we've covered characters and setting, we're going to look at the plot. So how does litter move from its starting point to its ending point? And what we're going to do first, I want to see if you know some vocab here. Take a look at this picture, and I want you to figure out what this is called. You have three answer choices. So it can be A, sewer, B, a storm drain, or C, a creepy clown's hiding spot. So if your teacher wants to pause and get some answers from y'all, I'll wait here for just a sec. All right, so hopefully y'all said B, storm drain. Storm drains are super, super important. They drain water from storms. I know, amazing name, but there is a problem with storm drains. So we're going to explore this a little bit more in depth using this illustration. We need to label a few things in this picture. So over here on the right, we've got a storm drain. On the left, this pipe underground, that's a sewer. And then in the middle, we're just going to pretend that this is the river. So let's start over here on the left. I want y'all to take a look at this brown, nasty water and follow the pipe up to see where that brown, nasty water is coming from. You probably see it's connected here to a toilet inside of a house. This sewer is for indoor dirty water. So anytime you flush the toilet or something goes down the drain, that nasty stuff goes into the sewer in these pipes underground. And then it goes to a really interesting place called a wastewater treatment facility. So this is a place that's meant to clean that nasty sewer water into very, very clean fresh water. A lot of science goes on behind the scenes. But anyway, sewers are for indoor dirty water. Okay, let's go back to the other side of our picture. taking a look at that storm drain. So storm drains, y'all, they are super, super important because they literally drain water from storms. So if it rains in San Antonio, that rainwater is going to travel into the storm drain, down a few pipes, and then it's going to get pushed into the river, right? Into a creek or a river, eventually the San Antonio River in our area. But y'all, there's a problem with storm drains, and that is that there's really nothing blocking the flow. So if you have any litter on the ground or even things like dog waste or car oil that's on the land, if it rains, where do y'all think that stuff is probably going to go? Down the storm drain, through some pipes, and into the San Antonio River. So this is how we see a lot of litter move from the land into the water through this network of storm drains. Again, super important piece of flood infrastructure, but they do have some problems when it comes to moving litter from the land into the water. All right, so I'm going to give y'all a little quiz. We're going to see what you've learned. How does litter get into the river? You have 3 questions. So question number 1, litter usually starts, is it A, on the land, or B, in the water? So teacher, if you want to pause here and get your answers, come back to me in a sec. All right, so hopefully y'all said A, on the land, right? That's usually where our litter begins. All right, question number 2, litter enters what when it rains? Does that litter enter the sewer or storm drains? All right, hopefully you said storm drains. That's where litter flows from the land through those storm drains. And then storm drains carry litter to where? The wastewater treatment plant or facility, or rivers and creeks? All right, hopefully you said rivers and creeks. Y'all, look at this picture. Ugh, this is terrible. This is what it looks like when a network of storm drains finally let out into a body of water. I want you to think about if you were a fish living in this little creek, would you have a super healthy habitat? Probably not, right? So unfortunately, this is what it looks like when a storm drain lets out into a water body. All right, y'all. So now we're going to move on to the turning point. Remember, this is the part of the story where the problem is at its worst. Something really bad is happening. So since we've talked about the characters, who's involved in this story, we've talked about the setting where it takes place, and then we've talked about the movement of litter from point A to point B. But we haven't really talked about how litter actually impacts ecosystems. And so that's what we're going to explore in the turning point section of the video. So litter has quite a few impacts. The first that we're going to mention today is entanglement. So of course, items can get tangled up in animals and vice versa. This is a good example of that. This is a cormorant, looks like a big duck, really cool bird that frequents the San Antonio River. And this particular cormorant was right outside of our offices at the river in the King William area. And we saw this cormorant kind of hanging out on the banks of the river, but he kept turning his head toward his tail feathers. And we couldn't really tell what he was trying to get at. So we got to take a more zoomed in picture. And I want y'all to see, what is he trying to get at in his tail feathers here? So you might recognize this. There's maybe a little shiny thing right here with kind of a string coming off of it. If you've been fishing before, you might recognize this as a fishing hook with fishing line attached. So unfortunately, this piece of litter got entangled or ensnared in the tail feathers of this cormorant. And unfortunately, I don't know how this story ends, y'all. This bird was too scared of people to let us get close enough to try to take the hook out. He kind of swam away from us. So I really hope that he was able to get it out. But unfortunately, I don't know how this particular story ends. But I can show you another one, another bird that I do know this had kind of a happily ever after ending. And this is a duck called the ring-necked duck. It's very ironic, I know. But you can see that there's something wrapped around his bill and then back behind his neck. And so long story short, the person who was out here taking photos of the river, they were here at the right place at the right time. They were able to call us, and we had some folks go out who removed that plastic ring from that bird. So this duck doing just fine, living his best life, happy as can be, right? But when we look at these pictures, we got to ask ourselves, okay, is it really realistic for us to be there 24/7 for the millions of animals, for each individual animal that lives in and along the San Antonio River? Probably not, right? There's just not enough of us to do that. And so we need to stop this problem before it gets to this point. All right, so another one of litter's impact is consumption. So again, we're kind of staying with the thread talking about animals. There was a research paper that was published where some folks looked at the stomachs of shorebirds, and this was somewhere in Canada. Like this herring gull here, this is just an example. This is not one of the birds from the study, but scientists looked at the stomach contents of birds who had passed away, and they were able to kind of take those stomach contents out and analyze what those birds had actually consumed. And a bunch of it was trash. And a lot of that trash was plastic specifically. So pieces of plastic bags and like the lining of coffee cups and rubber bands and all kinds of stuff. So animals, they don't know that litter is a thing, right? They don't have the concept of litter or trash. So when an animal sees something that looks like a snack and that animal's hungry, they're going to eat it, right? So unfortunately, these birds did consume quite a bit of litter. And this is just another example of one of litter's biggest impacts. So another one is really the absorption of chemicals. So if I told you that there was an item in the world that every year 4 trillion of this item was littered on the ground, what do you think that item is? You can pause here if you want to get some answers. All right. If you said cigarette butts, you are correct. Y'all, 4 trillion of these are littered every single year. That's crazy. So there was another scientific study done about the impact of the different chemicals that are in cigarette butts. And so this is a graph from that particular study where they are looking at the mortality rate, or they're looking at the percentage of animals who died when they were exposed to those chemicals over different periods of time. So if you look at this graph, let's just take one right here. This one represents the number of cigarette butts per liter of water, just the concentration of those chemicals. So if there was 1 cigarette butt per liter of water, and this animal or this group of animals was exposed to that amount of chemicals for 96 hours, about 40% of those animals died from that exposure. That's a lot. But if you think about when we go all the way up to 4 cigarette butts per liter of water, and if those animals were exposed to that for 96 hours, y'all, there's nearly 100% mortality. Almost every single animal died in that experiment, unfortunately. And this was conducted on fish, by the way. The actual study is in the notes section of the PowerPoint if you want to read more about it. But y'all, when I originally saw this graph, I truly thought, okay, 4 cigarette butts per liter, that's a really high concentration. I was kind of skeptical until I learned that fact that 4 trillion of these cigarette butts are littered every year. And then it looked a little bit more realistic. So the nasty chemicals in cigarette butts, they've got lead and arsenic and all kinds of nasty stuff. Not only are they bad for us, they're bad for animals as well. And so when you are looking at the absorption of chemicals, there's 2 different things if we really zoom in onto specific animals. So first, we're going to start with accumulation. So what does it mean to accumulate something, right? Kind of to gather. right? To get a bunch of stuff together. And so in this context, we're talking about bioaccumulation. And that's really when a chemical builds up in one particular organism over a period of time. So that's exactly what we looked at on the last slide, is how these different animals had this chemical build up in their own bodies over a period of time, which is obviously not good for them. We saw what the mortality rate was at those differing concentrations. But if we we kind of zoom out to like a food chain or a food web, we're going to talk about magnification. So what does it mean to magnify something? Kind of make it bigger, right? And so we're going to talk about biomagnification. And really, that is exploring how chemicals behave as you move up the food chain. So if you start with your primary producers, your plants that are possibly exposed to some chemicals in the water, those plants are going to absorb some of those chemicals into their tissues. And if you have an animal who's eating those plants, that animal is also going to get quite a few of those chemicals in their tissues. And then when you have another animal eat that animal and another animal eat that animal, y'all can see how the amount of this type of pollutant kind of builds up as you move through the food chain. So we're not talking about one species, we're talking about basically an entire ecosystem, a really big food web, and how it's all impacted by chemicals as well. One of the last impacts we'll talk about today is dispersal. So these pieces of litter can spread far and wide. If we are talking about primary microplastics, those are also called nurdles. These are the pieces of plastic that haven't been melted down into a product yet. So if I was a manufacturer and I wanted to make a black pen, I would order some black nurdles and then melt them down into whatever shape I wanted for my product. We also have another type of microplastic. These are secondary microplastics, and these are pieces of plastics that have broken off of an item that was already created. So if you imagine that this pen that I just talked about was like run over by a car a whole bunch of times, these little pieces of plastic would break down smaller and smaller into little bits. And plastic doesn't really biodegrade, y'all. It just gets smaller and smaller. Um, we have found microplastics in human blood and in our lungs and in our food. And science is still kind of out on the effects of those microplastics on our health. So we just kind of need to stay tuned to what scientists are finding. So jury is still out there. But these items, since they are so tiny, they can disperse. They can travel really long distances. So y'all may have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Well, I used to think that was like a mountain of litter floating in the Pacific Ocean, but it's really not. It's the collection of a ton of microplastics with some bigger items interspersed in there. I've heard it described that it looks like a peppery soup, all of these teeny tiny little particles in this water. And there's a really cool website where you can kind of explore that dispersal and how litter spreads around the world. So it's called the oceancleanup.com/plastic tracker. You can visit this QR code if you want to take a look at that. But I recorded my screen. I pretended to drop a piece of plastic in San Antonio and then wanted to just sort of see where it was likely to go. So I'm going to show you all that screen recording. So imagine me dropping a piece of plastic in San Antonio. It's going to flow through those storm drains into the San Antonio River. You can see that it's flowing here. We know that that water eventually makes it into the San Antonio Bay. Watch what happens when it gets to the Gulf. Not great. Not great, y'all. If you took the path that that little piece of plastic took and you spread that path out in a straight line, it's long enough to wrap around the world 8.5 times. That piece of plastic traveled so far away. So while the setting of today's story is San Antonio, this is not just a San Antonio problem. This is a problem all over the world, that our trash doesn't stay in San Antonio. If it's littered, it's going to make it outside of the city, possibly into the ocean. And that goes for trash everywhere else as well. We're all connected, y'all. So this is a problem around the entire world. All right, y'all. Let's take a little breather. This is often the part of the story that makes us feel the worst. So I want to check in. How does this make you feel? What emotions are coming up for you? You might feel sad or angry or disgusted, disappointed, frustrated, whatever you feel. That's totally valid. A lot of people feel that way. That's okay. I feel those feelings too, right? But y'all, if we just sit here and we just feel sad, is that going to do anything? No, of course not. That'd be crazy. We have to solve this problem. The end of the story hasn't been written yet, y'all. That's our job. So we can still create this happily ever after ending. We can work together to figure this out. So we're going to talk about the resolution of this story. How can we really solve the problem of litter? Let's talk about one way that you can help. You can safely pick up litter. If you see a gum wrapper on the ground or something, pick it up, toss it in the trash can, right? If you don't see a trash can around you, keep it in your pocket until you find one. If it's safe to pick up litter, please do so. That being said, don't pick up anything sharp. Don't pick up any needles. Don't pick up any broken glass. Make sure that you tell an adult if you see that kind of stuff and they'll take care of it for you. Be safe about it, right? Make sure that you're not running into a busy street or anything like that. Please make good choices. Keep yourself safe. And if it is safe for you to do so, picking up litter would really, really help a lot. And then another thing, y'all, we got to take care of our own trash. So preventing litter, making sure that our waste ends up where it belongs, whether it's a garbage can or the recycling bin, or if it's an item that you can reuse. And then another thing, this is a big one, y'all. We can educate other people. If you're a yapper, if you like to talk just like me, you can do this kind of stuff where you talk to people about the problem and try to get them to see something from your point of view. If you like to draw, you might do something that this family did over here on the left. They heard about this problem. They were really motivated to be part of the solution. And so they created these posters to put up around their neighborhood to educate their neighbors about why picking up litter is really important and how to help the animals in the San Antonio River ecosystem. And then over here on the right, this was so cool. This is a hallway display that the students in Marcia Ritchie's class at Gus Garcia University School, they made these really cool posters, this display in their hallway. So now every time a teacher or a student walks by this display, they're educated about how litter is really harmful for the planet and how they can help solve this problem. If you like music, write a song, perform a song. If you like to act, create a skit that can teach people about this problem. Use your strengths in order to solve this problem. And then another way that we can be really helpful is to support the businesses and brands who are making sustainable choices. If you go to a particular restaurant and they are letting you bring in your reusable cup, tell them that you appreciate that. Try to support them with your business. If you go to a restaurant that doesn't allow you to bring reusables, talk to them about it and tell them, hey, I would really love it if you could make a more sustainable choice so that I could continue to give you my business. And if you're not in the position to actually give money and to buy things from these businesses, that's okay too. Simply talking to them is really, really helpful so that businesses know when they're doing something right or they know when they can make a better choice. And then another way that we can help, this one's easy, Raw, close your trash cans. Don't let those little trash pandas get into these trash cans. Keep them closed, nice and tight. Report any illegal dumping that you might see. If you see something like this, please let us know. Please call the San Antonio River Authority. And then finally, how you can help. Let's do the 5 R's, y'all. You guys have heard this your whole entire life, right? Refuse. We can say no to an item. I don't need a straw. Thank you. I brought my own. Refuse something that you don't need. If you do have something or if you do need to use a product, reduce it, right? If you go to a restaurant, you know that you're going to get leftovers. Instead of asking them for a little box to go, y'all just bring your own container. Just bring something with you that you can reuse, something that's not going to end up in the landfill. Something that's reusable. I really like to take those brown paper bags from like HEB and rip them up and use them as my Christmas paper, like my Christmas wrapping paper and stuff, and drawing all over them. It's fun. And y'all, I never have to buy wrapping paper anymore. It's awesome. Also recycling. So recycling isn't as good as refusing, reducing, and reusing. But if you can't do any of those and you do have a recyclable product, it's best to obviously dispose of it in that way. And then finally, the last R is to rot or to compost. So if you have food scraps, putting them in a compost pile is just going to return those nutrients to the soil, which can then kind of keep that nutrient cycle going. So now that y'all are experts on the story of litter, we're going to take a little pledge. I want y'all to join me and my best friend, Freddie the fish. I want y'all to make me a pinky promise. So hold your pinkies in the sky. I know that you haven't done this since like third grade. I don't care. Put your little pinky in the sky. And I want you to repeat after me. Clean land equals clean water. And then one more time, repeat after me. I will not let litter trash my river. So now that you have taken the pledge, if you want to celebrate and get a song stuck in your head, you can visit the Trash Pledge song on our YouTube channel. We have a really talented musician at the River Authority who wrote and performed a song about keeping the river litter free. We made a ridiculous music video, so go ahead and enjoy that. You're welcome. And I just want to say thank you guys for writing this story with us. Again, the story of litter hasn't ended until we have worked together to create that happily ever after ending. So thank you guys for being involved. Thank you for caring. And if you are able to do a litter pickup on your campus, thank you so, so, so much for contributing to the solution to this problem. All right, y'all. I'll see you next time. Bye.